a life filled with violence and murder and incest, I think it said. So I'm like, okay, that just sounds nice. Hello. I didn't do a wrap up for July because I didn't really read many books that weren't already included in other videos. So I want to do a bit of a mini TBR for some of the kind of random books that I'm looking forward to reading, but also kind of wrap up some of the odds and ends from the past 2 months of reading. So I think I want to start this off with the TBR because that's all going to be new stuff. So I don't really want to give too much away about books that I have planned for specific videos. This is mostly going to be sort of odds and ends that aren't going to fit into a planned video per se. One thing that I want to mention, but I'm not going to get into specifics about, I am planning on doing an author focus on Judith Sonnet. I do have books picked out and planned to read for that video, but I don't want to give away which ones specifically yet. Just know that that video is coming up soon. Another book that I'm planning on reading is The Body by Stephen King. That is a short story that, if you are familiar with the movie Stand By Me, that is based off of that story. That's one that I've been meaning to read for a few months, to be honest, but I do feel confident that I will get to it in September. The plot, if you're not familiar with it, is kind of a coming-of-age story. You have 4 young boys that are friends. They hear about another boy that has gone missing in the woods and rumors that he has passed away in the woods somewhere. So they go on this adventure to try to find this body. I was a really big fan of that movie as a kid. Once I have that story completed, then I will be finally selecting a new Stephen King book, and we'll see how long it takes me to get through that one. Another one that I'm looking forward to, and this is part of the reason why I'm confident that I will get The Body read, there's this other book that I just sort of stumbled upon, Bruises on a Butterfly by Chad Lutzke. This is about a young boy who runs away from home because he has an abusive living situation, and he goes to live in this fort that he's built out in a cornfield. Apparently there is a cosmic spin on things. The description said that this was like a mixture of Color Out of Space by H.P. Lovecraft and Stand By Me. Color Out of Space was the one story by H.P. Lovecraft that I thoroughly enjoyed. So I'm figuring I'll read The Body and then I'll read that right afterwards. It'll just flow perfectly, and I'm very much looking forward to that. Another series that I have been meaning to start for a hot minute, Violence on the Meek by Stuart Bray. This includes 4 books. I'm not obviously going to fully commit to reading all 4 until I know that I like the first one. The plot of the first one, at least, it's about this man who, since he was a young boy, like 8 years old, he's just hated the world and hated people and had a chip on his shoulder. And when he's a grown man, he decides to write his autobiography. And I guess when he does that, you get to see a life filled with violence and murder and incest, I think it said. So I'm like, okay, that just sounds nice and dark. It just seems like a really dark, intense read. So I'm looking forward to getting that started, and I hope that I like the first one enough to continue with the rest of the series. And the last one, I happened to stumble upon this. This is just a silly read. The first one that I saw was Snow Shark 2, Terror in Space. This is by Brian Barry. So I just saw the cover and the title and I'm like, okay, that seems absurd. I want it. But of course I need to read the first one first. Plot of the first one is exactly what it sounds like. That there is a shark and it hunts underneath the snow and attacks people who are trying to vacation and ski at this winter lodge. I've always had a hard time enjoying horror with comedy, but I think I've kind of zoned in on the type of humor that I appreciate with horror after discovering Bizarro and just things that maybe are not considered Bizarro but are just silly but gory. I don't know how the shark got in space, but I want to find out. So now we are getting into the wrap-up portion of the video. I'm going to talk about all the books that I have not discussed in any other video, and then at the end I will do a very quick wrap-up of the ones that I have talked about. So my first announcement is that after many months, I finally finished Salem's Lot, and in a very, you can probably tell, in a very upsetting turn of events. I read it too hard, and it snapped right in half. So I am also upset about this development. The book is pretty old. It was not in pristine condition when I started reading it, mind you. However, I will admit that I'm not one to be overly gentle with my books, in the sense that I'm okay with them looking like they've been read. I'm okay with the crease in the binding. I'm okay with corners being turned. I'm not real concerned about trying to keep them pristine. I figure they're books, they're meant to be read. This, however, this is a bit much. I would not have chosen this to be a thing that happened, but it did, and so that is my bed, and I must lie in it now. Salem's Lot by Stephen King. If you are not familiar, it is an iconic vampire story. Basically, you have this town where we get a lot of different perspectives from different people in the town. A vampire and his little minions move into this creepy house in the town. They are trying to slowly infiltrate and take over this town person by person. Of course, you have enough people go missing or pass away under suspicious circumstances. It does draw attention. And this book does go through a lot of different characters. So basically, it's about this handful of characters from the book trying to fight back against this powerful vampire entity. So my thoughts on the book. I can see why it's a classic. The build-up in the beginning of the book, where they have not done the official reveal of the vampire yet. These scenes of these men having to go at night and take care of something work-related and feeling this weird energy when they have to go into this creepy basement, what turns out to be where these vampires live, but there is no verifiable danger present. The vibe is just off. I really felt that sense of tension reading those scenes from the book. I don't know if overwhelmed is the right word. This took me a long time to read, so I think had I gotten through it a little bit faster, it probably would have been less of an issue. It really felt like there were an awful lot of characters sometimes. I'm not sure that all of them were necessary. It's meant to make you care about the town as a whole and all these different residents within it. I liked the beginning. The middle got a little slow for me, but towards the end it picked up again and I enjoyed the ending of the book. I can see why it's so popular. Next up, I read Voracious by Ralph James White. And I just kind of randomly read this because I was in the mood. I wanted an extreme horror book. And Ralph James White is still my favorite extreme horror author. The plot of Voracious. There's this company that is selling a treatment that is intended to help people lose weight very quickly. You have either celebrities or wealthy people who are able to afford to pay for this service. However, it works a little bit too well and people lose weight very, very quickly, and they are really unable to stop. The treatment, it's based off of this critter that exists that has an extremely fast metabolism. It needs to eat every 2 hours or so. They took some genetic material from that creature and they tried to use that in humans, and because it was like, oh my gosh, it's working, so they rushed it to be able to sell it faster, to be able to make money faster, and did not take into consideration the safety and well-being of their clients. There are some serious side effects related to the animal that they got this genetic material from. In true Ralph James White fashion, it is clearly a commentary on societal obsession with weight, an easy way to lose weight and still be able to eat whatever you want. It's got the gore and the body horror. You know, it's an extreme horror book. It kind of is a mixture of, if you are familiar with the book Thinner by Stephen King, Richard Bachman, it's like a mixture of that and some type of a zombie thing. You have people at completely different weights, some people being overweight, being obese even, and other people who are not overweight but who are trying to be even thinner. It's this weird conundrum of having a society that is obsessed with beauty and thinness, and how those two things are often equated, that you cannot be beautiful unless you are thin. And while we have this pushback against unrealistic beauty standards, we also have an obesity epidemic. But yeah, so this was exactly what I'm always looking for with Wrath James White, and he certainly did not disappoint. This is a more recent book. I think this came out earlier this year. Next up, I have my 2 books from my sci-fi series, The Expanse, which is by James S.A. Corey. Apparently, James S.A. Corey is a pen name. It's a combination, it's 2 men writing under the pen name James S.A. Corey. Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank. This is always hard to talk about because we are a ways into the series at this point. So if you have any interest in sci-fi whatsoever, I'm going to try to give you just like a little hint of where we are in this epic saga. Last month, I read Babylon's Ashes. In this world, there are people who live on Earth, there are people who live on Mars, and there are Belters who live and mine the asteroid belt. And they are very disenfranchised. They feel like Earth and Mars just takes advantage of them constantly. They are mistreated. They are not well represented. They do not have a government that is willing and able to fight for them and represent them up against these more powerful sources. There is a man who is trying to rally support from Belters in order to claim their power against Earth and Mars, and is doing so by performing terrorist acts. Someone who truly believes that they are in the right and is able to convince people who are being mistreated. Their rights are not preserved the way that they should be, and so it's very easy for this very charming man named Marcos to get people on his side even though he is committing atrocities. You're getting into a lot of heavy political subjects. People who are able to manipulate others by pulling on their heartstrings, by pulling on things that matter to them, manipulating them into thinking that you have their best interest at heart, and ultimately you're just using them to serve your own purposes. It kind of shows different leadership styles between someone who is genuinely trying to do the right thing and trying to do right by people, trying to play the game the way it needs to be played in order to accomplish that, but of course is always going to face criticism for not being bold enough. Their strategy is not appreciated. People want to see action. And the reality of it is that oftentimes impressive displays of power are not the smart strategic move. I am under the impression, I believe, that the TV series that is based off of these books ends with this book. I feel free now to go ahead and start watching that without fear of spoilers or whatever. Leading into the next book that I just finished called Persepolis Rising. Now, this is interesting because it presents a new threat. This is very much the example of when you think that something is under control, there is just another one that's even worse waiting in the wings. It's really interesting actually because you have a similar premise to the other book where you have this new power coming in, trying to take over, thinking that they are in a better position to govern everyone than the current government in place, and they also believe themselves to be the good guy. However, their approach is very, very different. We will not attack you. We will not hurt you. We will not kill you. We will only defend ourselves. So if you attack us, we will eliminate you. They are very powerful and they come across very much as if they are trying not to abuse their power, but they are trying to assume control. They believe that they are in the best position to govern everybody. They have access to a very dangerous alien artifact from previous books. Because of this alien technology, that is what is giving them all of their power. So we are getting into people messing around with things that they do not fully understand. A lot of this book focuses a lot on how you can predict what will happen by learning history. History has a way of repeating itself. When I'm done with all the books, then I'm gonna have to do some kind of breakdown, like a real breakdown just on this series. It deserves it. It is so well written. You can sense all the ways in which the authors are trusting you as the reader to make connections. That sort of trust that the authors give you and don't feel the need to spoon feed you everything, to not always have concrete answers for things. I don't know, it's kind of, I feel like this sounds dramatic, but it just feels like a very dignified experience reading this. Like, it feels like the authors are treating you like you are capable of understanding what they're going for, but also they write the book in a way where I can understand what they're saying. Okay, so those are all of the books that I read the past 2 months that were not included in other videos. So I'm going to do a very quick summary of the other books that I read in case you didn't see some of those other videos. In July, I did a video about Aron Beauregard. When I did that video, I talked about the Cuck. It's about these men who they go and hook up with this woman. A man asks if he can watch, they let him, and then they live to regret it for the rest of their lives. In the Hands of the Heathens is about some college women who go to a different country to learn more about this endangered lemur, and in the process of doing that, they are able to offend the tribe that lives in that area, and chaos ensues. Playground is about a crazy old lady who likes to build playground equipment. It's either just straight up deadly or it is some sort of survival challenge. It's sort of like Saw meets Lord of the Flies. Yellow. Yellow is about a man who owns a store with his wife. He is a very timid, non-confrontational person, and so other people in the neighborhood are constantly taking advantage of him, and eventually that escalates to the point that they break into his home and commit violence against him and his wife. It's like a revenge story. And finally, we have Die Tomy, which is about two men who work for the morgue, and they go to the crime scenes to pick up bodies, and there is a body that they come into contact with that basically infects one of them. So those are all by Aron Beauregard. I also read The Resurrectionist by Rath James White, which is about a young boy who discovers that he has the ability to bring people back to life. However, as he grows up into a man, he does not use his power for good. The Running Man by Stephen King. It's about a reality in which there is a TV show called The Running Man where contestants get on the show, and the whole point of it is that they are going to be hunted down by this group of hunters who are trying to kill them, and if they can survive for a month, then they get a whole ton of money and they will be set for life. But of course, no one has ever survived that long. Okay, I did my viewer recommendation video where I read Fetal Backwash by Judith Sonnet, about a woman who gives birth to a demon baby, basically. What Good Girls Do by Jonathan Butcher is about a girl who is held captive in a basement by a man who keeps her down there just to SA her constantly, and she manages to escape. The Pig by Edward Lee is about a man who one thing leads to another, and he ends up being a director for adult films that are very sketchy. The weird stuff with animals, stuff like that. The Autopsy by Michael Shea is a sci-fi story about a man who gets called to do a second autopsy on a body that has died under weird circumstances, and it turns out that there is alien activity involved. And The Collection by Bentley is a series of short stories. I'm not going to go through each of them individually. One example is a story called Monty, which is about a man who comes home early from work. His wife is out of the house, and while she is away, he notices all of these very strange revelations about her. His stories tend to be less horror and just kind of weird and dark, but they do tend to be very creative and very open-ended. I did a video about horror books that take place on or near the water. Sacculina by Philip Fracassi is about two brothers, their father, and the older brother's best friend. Our older brother has just gotten out of prison, so they are all going on a fishing trip to celebrate him getting out and to kind of bond. However, some crazy things happen when they are out in the water, and they end up being trapped out in the middle of the ocean. The Cavern by Alister Hodge. Some cavers, cave divers. There is a sinkhole that has exposed a new cave system, and they want to be the first ones to explore this cave system and map it out. However, turns out that there is some weird creatures living down there. Down into the Sea by Dan Franklin. This is a bit of a coming of age story about a young boy who stumbles upon this creepy, weird mermaid at the pier. And then I also read Screams from the Ocean Floor, a horror anthology. Different short stories that are taking place on or in the water. There's one about a submarine that comes into contact with a massive underwater sea creature. There's other ones about mermaids. There's ones about a murderer who likes to drown their victims. And then just recently I did my Bizarro video. All three, the best Bizarro fiction of the decade, the best of Bizarro fiction volume 1, and the best of Bizarro fiction volume 2. They're all anthologies filled with short stories. All of those are just weird, insane short stories that are surreal and satirical and strange. It's fun and vulgar. I described it as being very adult content done in a very playful way, and I think that that describes it pretty well. A fantastic genre that I just discovered. Okay, so I just don't want to feel like any monthly wrap-up that I do is being overly redundant by spending a lot of time on books that I already discussed. So hopefully this works out okay if I just sort of briefly cover those. If you hear something that piques your interest, you can always check out the video where I go more into depth on that. Hopefully that works out okay. I don't know. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And maybe I'll see you the next time around. Bye. It's